Thomas walked down the hallway of the Anderson estate, his footsteps measured and careful. For 15 years, he had been the family's most trusted driver, a man who knew every secret, every whisper within these walls. Sarah Anderson, the billionaire's daughter, watched him from the shadows. Her 17-year-old eyes burned with a mixture of desire and something far more dangerous, a calculated rage that had been brewing for months. The house was quiet. Mr. Anderson was away on a business trip. The staff had been reduced to a skeleton crew. Perfect timing. Thomas hadn't noticed Sarah watching him. He was focused on preparing the car for Mr. Anderson's return, meticulously cleaning the leather seats, checking every detail. Dedication had always been his strongest trait. Sarah's mind raced. She had planned this moment carefully. Every single detail was calculated. Her fingers traced the phone in her pocket, the weapon she would use to destroy everything Thomas had built. He was coming out of the staff restroom, adjusting his crisp white shirt. Thomas was always immaculate, pressed uniform, polished shoes, a model of professionalism that had earned him the respect of the entire Anderson household. Sarah stepped into the hallway. Her movement was deliberate, calculated. "Thomas," she called out, her voice sweet yet carrying an underlying edge. He turned, surprised. "Miss Sarah, is everything all right?" She moved closer. Too close. Thomas took an instinctive step back. Something in her eyes made him uncomfortable, a predatory intensity that didn't match her young age. "I need your help," she said softly, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. Thomas shifted away. "Perhaps you should speak with your father or the house manager." But Sarah wasn't listening. Her fingers continued their approach, a calculated invasion of his personal space. "I want you," she whispered, the words hanging in the air like a threat. Thomas's heart raced. This was dangerous territory. He was engaged. He had a reputation to protect. And Sarah was just a teenager, the daughter of the man who had given him everything. "Miss Sarah, this is inappropriate," he said firmly, his voice steady but nervous. She didn't stop. Instead, she moved closer, her breath near his ear. "If you don't do what I want, I'll tell my father you forced yourself on me." The words were a knife. Cold, precise, deadly. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. He understood immediately what she was doing, what she was planning. "No," he said, taking another step back. "Absolutely not." Sarah's face changed. The sweet facade disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculated rage. She grabbed her own dress, tore it slightly. Then she started to scream. "Help! Help me! He's hurting me!" The hallway echoed with her screams. Thomas stood frozen, watching his entire world collapse around him. Footsteps, rapid, approaching. Mr. Anderson burst through the door, his face a mask of uncontrolled fury. Thomas knew in that moment that his life would never be the same again. The police station was a nightmare of flashing cameras and hushed whispers. Thomas Walker stood handcuffed, his world crumbling around him like a house of cards. Sarah's father, William Anderson, a man who controlled half the city's real estate and political connections, stood nearby, his face a mask of betrayal and rage. The same man who had once praised Thomas, who had treated him like family, now looked at him with pure hatred. "How could you do this?" William's voice shook with emotion. "I trusted you. I gave you everything." Thomas's fiancée, Elena, arrived at the station. Her face was a canvas of confusion and growing anger. She had known Thomas for years, trusted him completely. But now, doubt began to creep in like a poison. "Is it true?" Elena asked, her voice breaking. Her best friend Maria stood beside her, trying to offer support. Thomas looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Elena, I'm innocent. You have to believe me." But belief is a fragile thing, and Sarah had crafted her lie with surgical precision. The media descended like vultures. Headlines began to form. Billionaire's driver accused of sexual assault. Trusted employee betrays family trust. Dark secrets of a household staff member revealed. Each headline was another nail in Thomas's coffin. William Anderson was ruthless. Within hours, Thomas's entire life had been dismantled, his job, his reputation, his future, gone in an instant. The police interrogation was brutal. Detectives who had once respected Thomas now looked at him with contempt. They had a narrative, and Thomas was the villain. "Tell us what happened, though," they demanded. Thomas tried to explain about Sarah's advances, about her threats, but who would believe a driver's word against a billionaire's daughter? Elena's reaction cut deeper than any physical wound. Her eyes, once filled with love, now burned with a mixture of disgust and betrayal. "How could you?" she whispered. "With a child?" Thomas wanted to scream, to explain, but the world had already decided his guilt. The court hearing was a formality. William Anderson's influence ensured that. Witnesses were prepared. Evidence was manufactured. Thomas never stood a chance. 20 years, the judge declared. Sexual assault of a minor. Thomas collapsed. His mother in the courtroom began to wail. Elena stood silent, her engagement ring already removed. As they dragged him away, Thomas caught a glimpse of Sarah. She stood perfectly composed. A hint of a smile played on her lips. The architect of his destruction. Maria, Elena's best friend, was the only one who seemed uncertain. Something about the story didn't add up, but in the face of William Anderson's fury, her doubts were drowned out. The prison was a different world. Thomas, once a respected driver, now became a number. A convicted sex offender, the lowest of the low. Other inmates heard his story. Most turned away. Some threatened him. The label of child molester was a death sentence in prison culture. Months passed, then years. Elena never visited. His mother came occasionally, her visits becoming less frequent as time wore on. Hope is a cruel thing. It dies slowly, painfully. Thomas held on to one belief: the truth would eventually come out. But in a world controlled by wealth and power, truth is the first casualty. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. 3 years had passed since Thomas's conviction. 3 years of sleepless nights, of piecing together a puzzle that didn't make sense. Elena had moved on. She'd taken a job with William Anderson's company, seemingly accepting the narrative of Thomas's guilt. But Maria knew her friend, and something about Elena's acceptance felt manufactured. One rainy Tuesday, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She started investigating, quietly, carefully. Using her skills as a junior investigative journalist, she began to dig into Sarah Anderson's past. The first crack in the story came unexpectedly. A conversation overheard at a local coffee shop. Two of Sarah's former classmates discussing something that made Maria's blood run cold. "Remember how she tried to get Michael fired from his teaching job?" one girl whispered. "Exactly like what happened with that driver," the other responded. Maria's notebook filled with observations. Patterns emerge. Sarah wasn't just a one-time manipulator. This was a calculated pattern of destruction. Meanwhile, in prison, Thomas had become a shell of his former self. The system brutal, unforgiving. Prison isn't just about losing freedom. It's about losing hope. Maria's investigation took her deeper. She discovered 3 previous incidents where Sarah had made similar accusations. Each time, her father's influence had made the problems disappear. Settlements, non-disclosure agreements, careers destroyed. Thomas wasn't her first victim. He was just the most public. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a former housekeeper who had worked for the Anderson family. Reluctant at first, but Maria's persistence wore her down. "Miss Anderson," the woman said, her voice trembling, "she's not what people think. I've seen things." Pieces of a larger puzzle began to fall into place. Sarah had a history of manipulation, of calculated destruction, a pattern of behavior that went far beyond a single incident. Maria knew she needed more. Hard evidence, something that would crack the perfect facade of the Anderson family. Her investigation led her to an old security guard, retired, willing to talk for the right price. "I saw everything," he told her over a cheap diner coffee. "The cameras, the secret recordings. Mr. Anderson keeps everything." The Anderson mansion wasn't just a home, it was a fortress of secrets. Maria understood now that this was bigger than Thomas. This was about a system that protected the powerful, a family that could destroy lives with a single phone call. She began to plan, carefully, methodically. Getting evidence from a billionaire's home wasn't going to be easy. But Maria had something most investigators didn't: personal connection, a burning desire to uncover the truth. Thomas had one visitor in 3 years, his mother. Her visits became less frequent, her hope diminishing with each passing month. In prison, Thomas had two choices: give up or survive. He chose survival. He studied, took correspondence courses, learned law, understood the system that had destroyed him. Every book, every legal document became a weapon of knowledge. Maria's investigation and Thomas's prison education were about to collide in ways neither could predict. One phone call would change everything. "I might have a way to help you," Maria told Thomas during a prison visit. Her eyes burned with determination. Thomas looked up. For the first time in years, a flicker of hope crossed his face. The war for truth was about to begin. Maria's plan was dangerous, calculated, risky. She applied for a cleaning job at the Anderson estate. Background checks were thorough, but Maria had prepared a carefully crafted identity, references that would withstand scrutiny. The day she entered the mansion, her heart raced. Years of investigation had led to this moment. William Anderson's study was a fortress of secrets: cameras, hidden recordings, evidence that could destroy lives with a single click. The house was a maze of privilege, staff moving silently, Sarah Anderson floating through rooms like a predator. Maria knew the risks: one wrong move, and everything would collapse. Thomas's words echoed in her mind: "Be careful, they have more power than you can imagine." Her opportunity came during Sarah's birthday celebration. The house was filled with guests, alcohol flowing, security distracted. Maria slipped into William Anderson's study. Her hands trembled as she accessed his computer. The first video shocked her. Sarah, 3 years earlier, attempting to seduce another employee. Threatening, manipulative, the pattern was clear. Then another video, Thomas pushing Sarah away, refusing her advances, proof of his innocence. But Maria needed more. She needed something that would destroy the entire Anderson narrative. Her phone ready, recording everything. Suddenly, the door opened. Sarah stood there, her eyes cold, calculating. "What are you doing?" Sarah demanded. Maria's heart raced, but she had prepared for this moment. "I know everything," Maria said, her voice steady. What followed was a psychological battle. Sarah attempting to manipulate, Maria holding her ground. The confrontation escalated. Security guards called, Maria's phone live streaming everything to a secure server. "You can't prove anything," Sarah sneered. But Maria had already won. Hours later, police arrived. Not to arrest Maria, but to investigate the Anderson family. Videos surfaced. Testimonies emerged. The carefully constructed Anderson facade began to crumble. Elena, who had worked for the family, became a key witness, her own guilt driving her to finally speak the truth. The court hearing was a spectacle. Thomas, brought in, looked different, stronger, transformed by years of studying, of waiting. "Mr. Walker," the judge announced, "all charges are hereby dropped. $5 million in compensation. His record expunged. But the real victory was something more: exposure, the truth. The Anderson family's empire collapsed. William Anderson and Sarah faced criminal charges, their network of protection destroyed. Thomas's mother wept, not in pain, but in joy. Elena approached Thomas after the hearing, her eyes filled with regret. "I should have believed you," she whispered. Thomas had changed. Maria had become more than a friend. She had become his partner in justice. "Some things can't be fixed with an apology," Thomas said. His life had been stolen, years lost, but he was free. As they left the courthouse, a final message played on screens everywhere. A warning about the power of false accusations, about believing without evidence. Thomas and Maria walked together, not as victims, but as survivors. Justice, they had learned, was a journey, not a destination. Hit that like button, and I mean really hit it. Slam that button like you're breaking through walls of injustice, because every single like tells us you want more stories that matter, stories that make you think, stories that show the human spirit can overcome anything. And subscribe, man, subscribe like your life depends on it, because these aren't just stories. These are lessons. These are warnings. These are hope. Your support means we can keep bringing these powerful stories to you. Stories that might just save someone's life. Stories that might change everything. So, are you with us?